we're going to do Cape Casa, what's happening, and I certainly, for myself, have learned what is happening about asteroids. To tie all of this up, we have Alan Willoughby, and he is going to tell us a future vision. Now, it was very difficult to pick someone to do a future vision. Everyone has their own future vision. But Alan Willoughby is a space physicist with more than 30 years experience, from the Project Gemini to planetary probes. He has extensive U.S. Air Force and NASA involvement. And I'll let you read the bio on the paper because I want to give him as much time as I can. His colleagues at NASA have nicknamed him Asteroid Al because of his asteroidal obsessions. What he has told me that I didn't put on the bio, but I thought this was really charming, he said that when he grows up, he wants to write science stories, and he wants to do it with the insight of Isaac Newton, with the flair of Dr. Seuss. Help me welcome Alan Willoughby.
Thank you, Michelle. I don't intend to grow up anytime soon. I do intend to write science stories sometime very soon. However, when Michelle called me a few months back, I was not only flattered to have the opportunity to speak here about future vision, I was really excited because it gave me an excuse to buy a new toy. And this new toy was a time travel capsule that I had seen at Sam's Club. It was labeled affordable. Of course, I didn't dare ask the price. We never know what affordable means nowadays. But I went down and wrote a big check, bought myself a time travel capsule, and I said, this talk will be a piece of cake. I'll get into my time capsule, zoom into the future, 50 and 100 years, see what wonders we have achieved, and come back and report to the conference. That was a really easy assignment. All I had to do is take a few pictures, talk to a few people, collect a lot of handouts like we do at conferences, and bring them back and distribute it. Well, when I got the time capsule home, it seems, even though it was advertised to travel backward and forward in time, you could go backward, but only as far forward as the present, because the future is indeterminate, and it would be ambiguous to travel into the future. We haven't decided what the future will be yet. We will decide the future by our actions. So, what a bummer. But anyway, at least I can travel backward in time. And I said, well, I'll go to some of the, I wanted to do three things. I wanted to go back and see a real collisional event. But not a bad one. Definitely not the Cape boundary. Certainly not Tunguska. I'm no fool. Foolish perhaps, but no fool. And so I picked an event that I wanted to see, and I picked France, 1790, July 24th. Spectacular enough to be exciting, but not dangerous enough to be a problem. I did have my problems traveling in time. This capsule would go back at 10 years per hour, and be conservative. I went travel at 5 years per hour. But I ended up talking with 4 people on my travels because I wanted to see a real event. I wanted to speak with someone visionary, and I wanted to speak with someone who could really handle disasters. So attack the peril and the promise both. So I talked with 4 people, and the first, well, when I went back to France, I used my handy stopwatch, digital watch, and I was traveling at 5 years per hour. I was off by a couple seconds. Instead of getting to France, southern France, on July 24th, I got to Paris on July 25th. I was a day late. What to do? And this thing wasn't really good for short hops, but I said, well, I'll go interview somebody neat. So I interviewed, why not the Queen? Now, the French Revolution had started, and she was not at Versailles anymore. She was kind of held a virtual prisoner at Tuileries, or however one pronounces it. But there she is, and And I taped my interview on it. And another little gadget I bought at Sam's Club was really excellent. It tapes in French and plays back in English. So it would be nice for you to listen to. And here's my interview with Marie Antoinette.
Interview with Marie Antoinette, July 25th, 1790.
And what again do you call this enchanting little clock?
A digital watch, Your Majesty.
How cute. Thank you so much. But why do you wear such a strange costume?
I'm from America, from the United States, from another century, Your Majesty.
America? Of course, that explains it.
Your Majesty, yesterday in your country, many stones fell from the sky. What will you do?
Impossible.
There were hundreds of witnesses, Your Majesty.
Peasants?
Yes, peasants, Your Majesty.
They are hallucinating. It happens a lot lately. They hallucinate about running the country too. Why do that?
Because they are hungry, Your Majesty. They have no bread.
Then let them eat cake.
But the stones were real, Your Majesty.
Did they hurt the palace?
No, Your Majesty.
Did they harm the wine?
No, we don't think so, Your Majesty.
Then who cares?
The royal astronomers are worried, Your Majesty. They fear more stones may fall from the sky.
So let them worry.
Perhaps the stones could hurt the wine, or damage the palace, Your Majesty. They want to look in the skies to see when more stones are coming.
So let them look.
The stones in the sky are very dim, Your Majesty. They must buy telescopes. A few million francs will do.
You jest, the treasury is low. I haven't had a new gown in 3 days.
Perhaps only 1 million francs will do, Your Majesty. Perhaps only a $500,000 will let them look for stones in space.
Then let them look at the moon.
Yes, Your Majesty. It's nothing to lose our heads about.
Well, Marie Antoinette, of course, is the epitome of cluelessness in history. And so, for the record, I recorded her thought pattern, but she's not an ignorant or dumb person. In fact, she's very strong-willed. She just could care less. And in fact, the same situation to world leaders and politicians today evoke generally the response of cluelessness, or at worst, clue resistance. Anyway, what is a clue? You know, clue, if one is wise, a word is a clue. And I suggest that an event is also a clue. Someone could turn on the slide projector. This is a clue. To the wise, it should be sufficient. Madam Jean, this is a clue. This is happening in real time, or happened real time during the administration of clueless Clinton. And if once isn't enough, how about 24 times? A clue to the wise should be sufficient. We can turn that off now. An event is a clue. It should be sufficient. So where's the wisdom? Well, why a word to the wise is sufficient, volumes to the clueless are fruitless or useless, because in their context they're clue resistant. They're not unintelligent, they're quite intelligent to survive in politics. But they ascribe, many politicians, the media, etc., they ascribe ulterior motives to anyone with a problem that doesn't fit the current agenda. And this is a typical cartoon when the military thought asteroids are a problem. And that's because they could care less because it doesn't fit their agenda. So anyway, enough of Marie Antoinette. I wanted to see someone who could handle crises. I was off to see Winston Churchill. Now, so I hopped in my time machine, but to bribe my way into the palace in Paris, I got rid of my digital watch. So when I traveled there, I wasn't quite at the time I thought I was. I got there a little early and ended up with Neville Chamberlain, Arthur Neville Chamberlain, who I dubbed as Never Never Nev, British Prime Minister, and I caught him in March of 1939. And let me play an interview with Prime Minister Chamberlain.
Interview with Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. Your Excellency, I come from a special time and place. Thank you for seeing me. I seek your advice on a special problem. I'm sorry to intrude at such an awful time, Your Excellency.
An awful time?
The German problem, Your Excellency. They're building their armies, preparing to make war.
Be calm, be calm. I have solved that problem. We have the Munich Agreement. Germany will not make war. They promised.
Yes, Your Excellency. Now your advice, please, Your Excellency. Suppose, just suppose, small rocks in space may threaten our world. If they were to crash, that is.
Please, don't worry the people. They must remain calm. Now whose rocks might these be?
No one's rocks, Your Excellency. Just natural rocks.
Well, they must come under someone's authority. We would make a treaty. No collisions allowed.
A treaty with whom, Your Excellency?
With everyone. We must all agree. We can make concessions for those who hesitate to agree. Diplomacy can solve every problem.
But suppose some rocks may not obey, Your Excellency. Suppose they stray and hit the earth. What should we do then, Your Excellency?
They can hit the smitten land. Yes, that's it. Let them have the smitten land.
We want to see all the rocks, Your Excellency, to know which ones are threats. A scant £1,000,000 would fund our search, Your Excellency.
You mean some rocks in space are not threats?
Yes, Your Excellency. Most rocks are not threats anytime soon.
Then emphasize each one that is not a problem. They will call everyone, so they can go about their business.
Shouldn't we prepare to turn aside any rocks that are on a collision course, Your Excellency?
Let's let some hit first. That way we can build a consensus in both houses. Much more support, you know.
But perhaps some madman, Hitler perhaps, could turn a rock which may barely miss and make it hit. Shouldn't we prepare to foil such plans, Your Excellency?
Perhaps you won't think me. Let's not tell them. That would keep us safe.
Thank you for your time and counsel, Your Excellency.
You are most welcome, young man. Come visit our peaceful country anytime. I hope your homework goes well. And don't worry so much.
Okay. Neville Chamberlain epitomized some various thought patterns, and he was famous for the Munich Agreement, which is captured in this picture I call Neville Meets the Devil. And out of this several-day conference, there was the Munich Agreement to allow the Sudetenland to be taken, and Germany would have no more ambitions. Well, it wasn't long after my visit that the rest of Czechoslovakia fell, 6 months later Poland, and not long after that Denmark and the Netherlands, as Tom Garrels knows too well. But the pattern of thought that is expressed by Prime Minister Chamberlain is never address the cause of a problem. Talk about it, talk around it, whatever, but never address the cause, and never take a stand to disaster is inevitable, which have some very unsettling parallels in our current problem in the Everglades, and appease. Now, it's clear that he appeased Hitler with the Sudetenland, but the truth is, he was also appeasing, in a great deal, the isolationist sentiment that existed in England at the time, And we have found, and I've cataloged a dozen ways when we address the public about the horrors of a cosmic collision, we've found a dozen ways to appease the public so that they can stop worrying and go about the business. These, if we want to do our charge, if you will, to correct the situation, these are a dozen things we should never say or say very carefully. Now, I won't go into them all now, but I have read and heard many times the statement, the probabilities of a collision are very small. That is not only wrong, it's damn wrong. The probability of a collision with an asteroid is inevitable unless we act. When the populace hears that a collision probability is very strong, now mathematically per annum it is, very small. Mathematically per annum it is small, thank goodness. But when the populace hears that it's small, they think this never happens. And the truth is, it does happen, and it can happen at any time. A 1,000-year event can happen 1,000 years from now, or it can happen today, or tomorrow, or some any other year with equal probability. And I'll guarantee the time it does happen is an improbable time. But they go away with the impression that an event of a given frequency, they have that many years or millions of years or whatever to wait. And we know that they may or may not. Yeah, I won't discuss for a second time, I won't discuss the other things on that now, but hold them if we wish to add later. The third personage I visited was intended to be visionary, Jules Verne. And here's the interview with Monsieur Verne, who in his writings went to the journey to the center of the earth, 20,000 leagues under the sea, earth to moon, around the moon and back, and stuff, ideas that were way ahead of his time, and he might be a clue to building the vision.
Interview with Jules Verne. Monsieur Verne, I have traveled through time from the future to visit you and to seek your wisdom. I know it must be difficult to believe.
Not at all. I have already enjoyed the company of many time travelers. Where are you from?
1996, monsieur.
Aha! You are not the first to visit, but you will come from the earliest time future, closer from 2030 till 2042.
What luck! You can tell me, monsieur, what they have told you about their times.
That I cannot do. It could distance and break the future by closing happenings back upon themselves. I can only do with you what I did with them. Share my thoughts.
What are your thoughts about space, Monsieur Verne? How will we use the nearest asteroids?
There are asteroids near Earth?
They pass near Earth, monsieur. Thousands of them, we believe, and many millions of small pieces of natural debris.
Then build with them, of course. Build with them.
But they are hard to catch, Monsieur Verne. They whiz about our solar system in many directions. While many fly way out, then fly way in. They're truly eccentric.
Then ride on them, my boy. Ride on them. Think voyages. Think voyages. They are the answer to your dream.
But it is dangerous out there in space, monsieur. The high-speed debris, the radiation, the solar storms.
Then within the asteroids, my boy. Within the asteroids.
Yes, Monsieur Verne. That's what we can do. How can we do all that?
I will send you to a professor. He will teach you how. Here is his address.
You say you met many time travelers from 2030 until 2042? Why so many, monsieur?
They say that time travel has become cheap, affordable, they say, to the common person.
Then why not after 2042?
I don't know. Does anyone live on Earth after 2042?
I hope so. My children do. My grandchildren do. Maybe, if I'm lucky, I do too. I can't be certain, monsieur.
Where are you going in such a hurry?
I must move on. We have so much to do. We'd best not wait.
Okay, and he was indeed one of the most visionary gentlemen I've had the privilege to meet. Among the others is John Lewis. If you want visions, read John's books. But anyway, the thought patterns, obvious think voyages, transportation, going to and from, making the solar system our travel network. Let's not hesitate to use new technologies, and where we have problems, turn them into assets. And so what is the kind of vision that does this? And I don't usually present equations to public audiences, but in this case I'll make an exception. This is a rocket equation. A lot of people think the rocket equation is what prevents us from traveling far, fast in space, because as the difficulty, or delta V of a mission gets steeper and steeper, the propellant requirement, or the initial mass of the rocket, follows an exponential and goes way up. And the general way people try and get around this is follow a different curve, which is based on a better specific impulse. And this is really a family of curves. But to really demystify the rocket equation, what does it say? It says the linear part pushes the payload, and all this other propellant is used to push propellant. So, if you get your propellant that's already traveling in space, in paths you want it to go, you don't have to make very much propellant. It also says, if we refuel often and keep working in small delta V's, where the exponential curve and the minimum linear curve are close together, then we've simplified our test. So refuel often, and stop wasting money and effort to make propellant just to push other propellant. One visionary system that Monsieur Vernon would love is a refueling architecture. Now, the escalator orbits going up to Mars, where you ride from Earth orbit to Mars orbit on a short, fast leg, and then let the vehicle continue around at the slower part. Those escalator orbits have been defined over a decade ago, written up by Niehoff and company at SAIC, promoted by Gerard O'Neill and others. But basically, those are tuned orbits, and into those orbits, we have envisioned in the past luxury liner spacecraft. Elaborate, large habitats that go round and round with spin for artificial gravity, have agriculture and other things in them, sort of the high end, the Grand Hyatt, if you will, of space travel. Okay? However, what we realize is that using the asteroids, we do not have to wait to build the Grand Hyatt. We can start with the raw materials and work our way up through the log cabin of spacecraft and on up to maybe a Spanish galleon type accommodations, and eventually get higher if we want to use advanced technologies like chemical vapor deposition or nanoengineering or whatever. But we don't have to start at the high end, we can start at the simple end. And also for multiple refueling, if there were refueling supplies in high Earth orbit and Mars orbit, oops, that's T-Mars. Yeah, not too hard to do. But how plausible is it to make the rest of the system? Now, since Mars and Earth are not matched, basically you probably want 7 sets of escalators so you can come and go at your will. Is this a plausible thing? Well, what do we have to work with? This is a plot of how many asteroids of any size? Well, 100 meters is large enough to make sufficient propellant, even if it's only, 10% volatiles or whatever. We're talking hundreds of thousands of these, and they're not all going in the right direction or whatever. But if you look at how they are distributed, and I won't put all these curves on, I'll just represent it with one. This is a distribution of the orbital size of the near-Earth asteroids, and the escalator orbits in red, the red bar, we're talking about near the peak of the expected distribution of such objects. In other words, there's lots of objects, all we have to do is see them and select from them, fine-tune their orbits into resonance. Now, it's not a big haul, it's a fine-tuning operation once you do the search and selection. There are similar things that have to do with eccentricity and inclination, and they all come out favorable. Those escalator orbits for Mars are in the mainstream of the population. Now, if it's a rubble pile, you could fill plastic bags with the rubble, use them as shielding, use a net, because this is a rubble pile, but with tethers, a little creativity, and such, you could build an artificial G, a log cabin version of sort of a space transport system, and you hop on and off of it, as you come to your destination. If you want to scale up more, or if you have more substantial objects to build from, you could cut an asteroid in sections, throw away or use the trimmings as you choose, set up a tether system in tension, have a power plant, and run power cables to dual habitats, just in case, but basically you spin this thing up, you get your artificial gravity, and that's another thing. Much more elaborate and grander schemes have been suggested by visionaries better than myself, but those are in the details. And we don't even know how to get from where we are today to that. So I think it's high time we visit the fourth personage. And this was the professor that Jules Verne told me to go see. Willoughby, ridiculed for really rash ideas in his younger days, and quite revered for his accomplishments even in his own time, and even more so today. So here's the interview with Professor Pasteur.
After 2042.
I don't know. Does anyone?
Thank you for seeing me, Professor Pasteur. I was sent to seek your advice by Monsieur Jules Verne. He said you could show me how to fulfill some dreams.
I will try my best. What is your problem?
It will seem strange and ridiculous to you. Please don't scoff at what I'm going to tell you, Professor.
I have been scoffed at often. Pay no attention when people scoff. Pursue the possibilities, no matter what others say.
Suppose we know, and I can't explain just now how at the moment, suppose we know that space is not empty. They are cruising about the sun in many directions of their own, small pieces of planets not yet fully formed.
Like germs. Germs in space.
Yes, I suppose they are. These small pieces, asteroids, cause great harm when they collide with planets. But on the other hand, we can use them to produce wondrous things.
Like germs, of course. Harmful or helpful. Are you sure they're there?
Yes, Professor, we know they are there. They're just difficult to see. We need good telescopes.
Like germs. Difficult to see. We need microscopes rather than telescopes to see germs.
You're right, Professor. I had not thought of them like germs before.
I have no trouble thinking more asteroids might exist.
Now, Professor, we want to make many things from these asteroids for living and traveling in space. Monsieur Verne said you could tell us how.
But I don't know how.
I know what we would like to make, Professor, just not how to proceed.
you been to these asteroids?
Why no?
Then do not be so presumptuous. Keep an open mind.
Yes, we should keep an open mind.
I knew little about making wine a few years ago, when it was turning south, but we solved that problem.
How, Professor? Very straightforward. We searched out the good and the bad, then took samples of each. Yes, we can take little samples. Thank you.
No, not little samples, as much as you need, from many experiments.
Experiments, Professor?
Yes, experiments, with an open mind. Experiments let you know what is real, what is possible.
We will, Professor, if we can afford to.
You cannot afford not to experiment. Without learning, dreams will remain only dreams.
Yes, you're right, Professor. We cannot afford not to experiment. With real samples, of course.
Of course.
Is there anything else I should know?
Yes, persist.
Persist?
Yes, persist. There will be obstacles. You must persist.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Pasteur.
I'm sorry, I should have shown the professor's likeness as the interview was going on. But that's Professor Pasteur in portrait. A more revealing picture is him in the laboratory, because it was Pasteur at work that made the difference. And the work were experiments with real samples of meaningful stuff. And what are Louis Pasteur's thought patterns that will lead us to create our vision of the future? First, an open mind and rejection of ridicule. And as we talk of asteroids, we will be ridiculed. We will be ridiculed often, and by people of respectable intelligence and respectable position, and people of less so. But we must be immune to ridicule, have an open mind. We do not know the answers. What we don't know is more important. But the insight of Professor Pasteur was to believe in the power of things that could be barely seen. And that's what we're doing here. We are believing in the destructive power of things that are barely seen. And we are believing in the constructive power of things that are barely seen. And so the analogy of germs and asteroids is a very strong one. In fact, even though the politicians may be clueless, mothers and fathers are not clueless. Rarely have any of them seen germs, but you are always admonished to wash your hands before you eat, etc., etc. Wash your hands after using the toilet. We believe in germs. We believe in their powers. We modify our behaviors because we believe in their dangers. We modify our behavior because we believe in their dangers. Now, isn't that what we are asking governments and others to do about the asteroid problem? We don't want to stop the wheels of business and everybody get off and solve the collision threat. We just want to make small changes in our public behavior in recognition of the hazard. And so when we get the people, the public, which politicians respond to believe in germs in space and respect their powers, then we will have crossed, I think, the biggest hurdle towards getting support. And with a little support, basically, the next thing is to get real samples, meaningful samples, not a few grams that get locked in a vault to be requisitioned with long treatises by scientists in ivory towers. But I mean real samples, enough stuff to put in the labs of the engineers who will design equipment for resource utilization. Essentially, the coal production labs heavy industry type things that bridge the gap between academia and industry, if you will, those kinds of labs. But real samples on real experiments on real samples. Now, is it possible to get real samples in sufficient quantity? A recent study done by myself and SAIC in Chicago, most notably Alan Friedlander, who has done many things over the years, commands immense respect for the integrity of his calculations. And by NASA Lewis, we looked at cases of returning samples with electric propulsion, small vehicles, just 5 kilowatts, from a variety of targets. Nereus was included as an intermediary. Hathor was the most difficult. It's an Aten asteroid with some inclination. Several cases of 1991 VG, which is an Arjuna object in an Earth-like orbit. That's the easiest target. And also Deimos. So we looked at those, and the most exciting, really, of course, is the easiest. The technique looks very favorable for each of the cases, but for Hathor, you really would want a bigger rocket than a Delta II. We can find ourselves too small and cheap. It's not, it turns out, cheap enough to be a discovery proposal, because the first time you fly any substantial electric propulsion, you have to pay about $100 million extra to flight qualify the electric propulsion. But once you do the second mission of this class, it becomes a discovery price class mission. Now, what does it bring back from 1991 VG, which I think stands for very good? That's not how it got its designation, though. In 2.5 years, it'll bring back something on the order of up to 600 kilograms. And it'll return it, and this is a small vehicle launched on a Delta II 7925, and it has xenon ion propulsion, but it'll fly sort of out of the Earth's gravity well. You launch it to just barely escape. It rendezvous with 1991 very good, by use of a tether sampling system, which we scoped, I guess is the appropriate word. You can bring that back up to the order of 600 kilogram samples. We then costed a baseline mission to bring back 300 kilograms to the space station. And of course, on the space station, they're looking for more constructive things to do. And this could indeed be one of them, and where it's just taken on board by the astronauts. And as an Arjuna object, it's very unfavorable for its synodic period. It passes very close by Earth, but then takes 25 years to come around again. So if we were to sample it at its worst opportunity, turns out the mission is longer, 6.2 years to do the sampling, bring back 300 kilograms. Very flexible mission. We can speed it up or slow it down, take more or less. If performance is low at the beginning, we can adjust and compensate with the EP. If performance is above the nominal planning performance, we can do much more. This would be characteristic really of any Arjuna. And the neat thing about sampling this object at the worst time, when it's kind of opposite the sun from the Earth, why would anybody want to do that? Well, one reason one might want to consider that is to know exactly what it's like, whether it's worth it, and how it's built, so that as it comes drifting by again with a small delta velocity, using its own reaction mass from equipment you build, you hurry home with the sample, take it to the lab, finalize the design on your mass driver, if you will, and capture it into high Earth orbit as it comes drifting by again. Now, probably better targets will come along in the meantime, but this is a somewhat carbonaceous object that would be very, very easy to capture into high Earth orbit. So not only do you do the sampling of that class of objects, you've laid the groundwork for putting your fuel depot in high Earth orbit. It's only sort of 2.5 steps away. We could follow Custer's edict to me. Get real samples, not little samples, not 10 grams, big enough samples to do what you need to do, bring them in the lab and do real experiments. That will engage the public, the industry, more than a few grams that are only good under the microscope of a few scientists. Now, what might Pasteur say about the hazard? Well, I'm not sure what he would say, but this is what he said about bacteria or germs, and it's an awful close thing. It's terrifying to think that life may be at the mercy of these infinitesimally small planets. It is also consoling to hope that science will not only remain powerless before such enemies, since it is already able to inform us. Of course, the information is different for our case than for the case of germs, but the sentiment is right. And what else might Pasteur say about the hazard? Pasteur, late in life, when asked what he would do different, he would say he'd pay even further attention to Bishop Bousset, my French is terrible, of course, who said he was a great orator, bishop. The greatest disorder of the mind is to believe that things are so because we wish them to be so. And Pasteur had that tenet as he went through his experiments. He did not presume the answers. He did the experiments and found the truths. It's easy to observe that we believe that the next extinction will not happen. And I think the real reason we believe that is not because of the statistics, although they nudge us in that direction, of course, but we wish to believe that we will not soon be extinguished. It would be just darn unfair for us to be the last generation of humanity. And it would be darn unfair to our kids if they were the last generation. We really wish it's not so. But we have already bought the lottery ticket of doom for the next 20 years. If something's going to hit us in the next 20 years, we have scant chance of negating it. By hoarding our pennies and not funding Dr. Garrels and his research and doing the other experiments necessary, we are, for a few pennies, buying the lottery ticket of doom for our kids for the 20 years beyond that. Because each block of time that we delay, we are in the same position we are now. We are at the mercy of luck. And luck will run out. We don't know when. But if I asked you as you leave the room, please purchase a lottery ticket for your children. It won't cost you much. In fact, we will give you $1 if you take this lottery ticket. But the grand prize is death and extinction. Who would really take such a ticket? Well, that's exactly what we're doing as we choose not to fund searches, as we choose not to fund a rigorous engineering approach to sampling the asteroids and comets. And we lump good proposals, such as yours and the others, to a queue of science, just everybody to take their turn to keep the scientists happy and kind of off our backs. Okay. For a few measly pennies on the billions, we are selling you lottery tickets of doom, when we could be selling you a grand future. And in fact, that grand future might be quite profitable. So the cost of doing all this over the long haul may be a huge increase in wealth as opposed to a huge cost. So let's hope we don't have mental disorder. In summary, asteroids are like germs. They're hard to see, they're hugely destructive, or hugely helpful, as we choose. It's hard to take Jules Verne seriously in a world controlled by Marie Antoinette's and Neville Chamberlain's, which we have controlling the world now. To affect any change, we got to stop appeasing people. We have to stop pulling the rug out from the message that we have to the public. And those were those dozen ways of appeasing that I listed. Those are all things I hear regularly. And inspired by Bernian visions, we should set about business, as Louis Pasteur would have set about business, the asteroid business. Search, sample, and experiment. Thank you. So, by way of credits, the role of Marie Antoinette is played by my niece Gina. Neville Chamberlain and Louis Pasteur by my son, Matthew. And Jules Verne by my brother Keith. And I do have copies of that study that I referred to. I have just a couple here, but if you give me your name, I'll make sure you get a copy of the studies on how much can be sampled from the asteroid belts in a robust engineering sense.
Thank you very much, Al. Let's have another round of applause. Now we know why they call him Asteroid Al, because he doesn't need respect. We're a little short on time, but if we would take one or two questions, if we have them. Yes, Steve.
Is either where Al Morton is a big optical telescope also 1 to 2 meter class. Somebody thinks 1 to 2 meter class. That's where you go out of the infrared dimension. Infrared, the same size dimension.
Well, Tom is in the back of the room, and I think he's the better person to respond to that. The question refers to optical versus infrared telescopes. There's certainly a role for both, but I think Tom can better respond.
Well, essentially the situation is that the larger detectors are presently the charge coupled devices, the CCD, quite large in fact. If I had one here, it's about 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters, that go up to about 1 micron, about 0.85 micron. And therefore it's most efficient to look at that range, although it is true that the greatest output of the asteroids is still at larger wavelength. We just don't have the large detectors at this time, and it doesn't look like they're forthcoming very soon. We are keeping an open mind on that, and we have considered to hang a small, that would be cryogenically cooled infrared, it's the thermal infrared, which is about 15 microns, type of telescope on 36 inch. It's too expensive, we just don't have the money for it, and it doesn't look that promising yet until larger detectors will come online, which may happen.
Okay, let's take a question here first before you get a second.
In our role as president of the Oregon L5 Society, we went to see our newbie senator out in Oregon. He was one of the staffers. The closest we could get to talking to anything about asteroids was resource exploitation. We talked to him most primarily about SSTO because of the situation that's coming up. And Senator Hatfield was the transportation aide, so we also talked to him about transport on Earth. We did find, however, that when we attempted to speak about other threats beyond that, that how do you put it, it wasn't that the interest dropped off. The fear level, not of asteroids, but of getting away from the senator in the aid, became acute. In particular, one of the difficulties we find is that decision makers, the people who would get us to talk to them or who would talk to them themselves are afraid of speaking in that fashion. Are we going to have to first go out to the populace and then back into the senator, or what? We enter this type of difficulty.
That's very good commentary. Thank you very much. Some professions, including the political professions, are very sensitive to ridicule and public perception, and have to tread very carefully to survive the next election. And I can understand that and appreciate that. And so the question boils down after those observations, must we go to the public first, or can we punch through to some sense of responsibility directly in the political establishment? And of course, Gene Shoemaker and his committees are continuing to work the political end, and George Brown of California and his committee seem to attune very well to the issues. Not all politicians are clueless, but they happen to be on an authorization committee, not an appropriations committee. So politics is a maze, and we ought to continue in all fronts. I think it's high time to go into high gear to reach the public in some different ways. Not to set aside our efforts to reach governments, but our governments are truly representative in democracies, and they respond to public opinion. And on this topic, there's a public apathy, and so in that context, it's very natural that they would respond to it. I would hope they'd be wise enough to do the right thing and then dress it up with whatever words they need to continue getting elected. It should not be difficult. They're agile with the language. And so reaching their mind and reaching their rhetoric become two related challenges, but not the same challenge. But the thrust to develop asteroids as a resource appeals to their spirit, curiosity, and greed. Now, curiosity was the scientist, but they held a little sway in recent years and are expected to hold small sway in coming years. Greed is business and industry, I think, and that's a negative way to put it, but profits is a nicer word, and entrepreneurship is a nicer word. That can be postponed, but it has a good American tone to it. Whereas the threat has the sense of urgency, but it sounds like it will create a cost. So I think the blend of all three, but most strongly the blend of development in the space mining with the urgency driven by the threat is probably the vein to reach the public and politicians. Okay?
This is sort of a comment on Tom's comment about infrared. That there was a recent report in the British journal Nature that there's been a new superconductivity-based optical sensor discovered that lets you do essentially with optical photons what germanium devices can do with gamma ray photons. So you get the energy, the time, and the fact the photon came in all simultaneous. Imaging, spectroscopy,
And ranging all at once, or
what?
are you implying there's a ranging that can be determined from the timing?
If the time of arrival was of use, then, like I say, with measuring periods on pulsars and things like that, it would be reflect. What I'm thinking is, if you can do that kind of thing at optical frequencies, these might also be very good detectors down at far infrared.
Since I'm going to take this more as a comment.
I can't really respond meaningfully to that, but if Tom wishes to now, or if you wish to discuss it with him later.
Or I think since it's more of a discussion than a question, I'm going to ask that you, after we're adjourned here, it would be better to go into, you would really need to go into some depth on that, and unfortunately we don't have the time. That sounds like a great session just on its own. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I've certainly enjoyed it, and I have indeed learned about what's happening with asteroids. My own personal vision is very much not the danger. I have trouble, as unfortunately maybe I'm Marie, but I look at an asteroid as a friendly neighbor in the universe who someday perhaps will come by and visit, bringing gifts. And all we have to do is, as Tom Garrels is doing, find out about when he's going to come to visit, hop aboard, be the first hitchhiker of the galaxy, get a ride, get these great gifts that this asteroid is bringing to us, hitch a ride to wherever that asteroid happens to be going. So I look forward to encounters with asteroids. And I want to leave you with that thought. And again, thank all of our speakers for a very nice session. Thank you.